After watching Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation, I absolutely fell in love with the franchise. So much that I went out and I picked up the entire light novel series that I could get my hands on. And for those who don't know, I've been doing a full-on analysis of the novel series from the very beginning all the way up into the end of what was covered in the first season of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation, the anime series. And of course, as you do something like that, you notice a lot of things are either changed or skipped. And that's what brings us to this series of videos. A list of the most insane things either skipped or changed in the anime adaptation from the light novel series. While some could be possibly covered in some sort of way in later seasons, for the most part, a lot of these things feel like they're skipped for the sake of saving time and not getting too bogged down in the details of how things work. But additionally, keep in mind, this is from a perspective of somebody that has only watched the first season. So I'm not going to give any spoilers to anything post the anime. But with that said, there is a lot, so this is my second and final segment. Let's jump into it. Another tragic thing that was sort of skipped in the anime adaptation for Milshin specifically is a lot of the interactions between Rudius and Paul, and specifically Norn. The way the anime kind of plays it out is that he gets there, he has a fight with Paul, he makes up with Paul, and they immediately leave. There's so much more in here. Specifically that at some point, Rudius runs into Norn while she's playing in a room, and she immediately chucks a block at him. And so he's like, well, this is not going well with my reacquainting myself with Norn. She obviously hates me after I punched Dad. But additionally, Paul and Rudius end up setting up a dinner, and they actually go out to dinner together. And Eris kind of forced herself to go along with him. So you have this very awkward dinner meeting between the family. You have Paul, Norn, Rudius, and Eris. The entire time, Eris is furious with Paul because Paul fought with his son, and she thinks that he's the worst person in the world. She's also furious with Norn because Norn is being mean to Rudius. At the same time, Norn is angry at Rudius for punching Paul. And you have Rudius and Paul, who made up, are kind of just going, oh, what are we going to do here? Oh, what are we going to do here? Let's just talk about random things. And they just talk a whole bunch of things about family, birthdays, and all this kind of stuff that really does get each other kind of caught up with each other's feelings and everything they've gone through. So, again, another really sad skipped opportunity for the anime to at least establish one key important thing. And that's that Rudius gave up on Norn. Not that he's giving up on her forever, but he acknowledges that the age of Norn at the time, she's never going to accept that Rudius and Paul have made up. She's going to hate him, and there's no talking her out of it. She's made up her mind. And it makes sense because Norn has only had her father this entire time for the last 2 years. And so she doesn't know anybody else. And she sees Paul as this great person that saved her and that is her father, and he's the greatest person ever. Anybody that punches him is the devil, essentially. So Rudius essentially gives up. He says, look, I'm not going to try to keep pushing it. Hopefully down the road, when we meet again, she'll be older, and then I can explain the whole situation. She'll be more accepting of it. So again, it's kind of that unfortunate thing of him kind of going, you know, look, let's put a pin in this for now. Gosh, this is one that my first moment of actually anime. In the Eris the Goblin Slayer chapter, we seen that Rizurd was following Eris around in the anime. That was not the case in the novel, and when I read this moment, I said, wait, Rizurd has somebody he's going to meet? Wait, Rizurd has a friend? Yes, in the novel, Rizurd, when Rudius is making his letter to send off to Paul, and Eris goes off to Goblin Slay, Rizurd is going to meet his friend. As he was entering the town, as they were circling the town, he's seen something that looked familiar, and so he goes to meet his friend. His friend is named Gash Brosh, and we don't find out until later that he is the commander of the Missionary Knights. And so he essentially went to Gash Brosh, told him his situation, told about everything that's going on, and Gash Brosh wrote a letter to get him across the next port, because the port city's not going to let Rizurd go across it. And so he wrote this letter, and Rizurd gave that letter to Rudius to get them across, because Paul didn't know how they were going to get Rizurd across. Rudius was assuming they were just going to have to smuggle him again and probably run into another incident like what happened at Zamport. So yes, Rizurd was not with Eris. I don't know why they did that, which really sucks, because that gets us into one of the most heartbreaking skip content of the entire first season. And yes, that is Therese Latria. Because after Rudius leaves Milshin, he obviously makes it to Westport. And at Westport, he essentially thinks that he possibly has a shoe in. He's got this letter from this Gash Brosh guy. He hands it over at the checkpoint, and they immediately rush to the back. And they're kind of shuffled back into the back room where they meet Duke Bakshil. And he's the head of the Westport, and he wants to have nothing to do with allowing a Superb to go across. And he believes the letter that he got from this Gash Broshk, the commander of the Missionary Knights, wasn't wrote. It was a forgery. He was claiming it was a forgery. He says there's no way this guy would let this demon get past. And Rudius tried so many things in this meeting to try to talk him. He even used Edis's name of the Grey Rat family to threaten the guy. And that eventually got Duke Bakshil to finally say, okay, that's fine. You two can go. But that guy, that Superb, that demon, no, he stays here. And it isn't until a knock comes at the door, and this lady walks in, and immediately Rudius says, wait, Mom? Yes, it was like the big mind blow moment of the novel series. He calls out, Mom? This lady walks in. It's his mom. It's Zenith. And he freaks out. But then she looks down and says, no, I'm not your mother. I don't have children. No, this is Therese Latria, Zenith's sister. Zenith's sister. Yeah, she's a very important person. Obviously, we've seen her in the Edis the Goblin Slayer chapter. We didn't really get a sense as to who she was. But yes, this is the sister of Zenith. And she basically talks Duke Bakshil into allowing all three of them to cross. And not only that, but she gave them everything they would need. Medicine to help seasickness. Again, anime doesn't explain this. All this stuff, everything they need. Because not only is Rudius her nephew, but additionally, Edis saved her life. And she wanted to repay Edis. She doesn't like Rajur, doesn't trust him, but she's willing to do this for the person that saved her and her nephew. And yes, it's super cute because it follows a scene with essentially Therese Latria using Rudius as like a hug pillow and snuggling herself into Rudius and talking about how Zenith always talked in her letters about how cute you are, and now I know it's true. You are super adorable, and just rubbing into him over and over again, and the entire time he doesn't like it. Because we get a sense here that, again, if it's somebody that's related to him, he doesn't have any sort of reaction to it, and he doesn't really understand why. But a super cute scene, and also Edis being super jealous because, again, she's in there rubbing into him. It's really great, and it was a huge bummer to have skipped that because I would have loved to see that animated. Jumping across the ocean, we get a really interesting scene, and this is where we start to hint at a particular person, Nanahoshi. As they arrive in the central continent, in the southern central continent specifically, they end up running into this one back in the corner shop, this one little restaurant, and they're selling at this place essentially karage. this dragon meat Nanahoshi style. And Rudius immediately kind of recognized the smell. They end up buying it, and yes, it is essentially really poorly made karage using dragon meat. And so Rudius tries it, and he immediately just freaks out. He thinks it's terrible that this guy made the worst karage. The rice is okay. The worst karage he's ever had. He didn't cook it right, didn't use the right temperatures, and he berates this restaurant owner about how terrible, and this could never be called karage. And eventually, Rajur and Edis has to drag him out of the place because he's that mad. He turns into the grumpy chef. But we find out after he leaves, and this is something that they could cover in the anime eventually. As they leave, they end up finding out that this restaurant owner was trying to keep this legacy of this family's restaurant alive. And he finally gives up because this commander comes in and recruits him. Yeah, this guy, this restaurant owner, is the death god. One of the strongest entities of this world, the death god. Like, Rudius spouted insults at this guy, this restaurant owner, and he was the death god. Rudius was so close to death, literally and figuratively. And this kind of continues as they travel. Pretty much, there's so many crops of rice. You see, like, for a brief moment, Rudius is eating rice in the anime. But yeah, this whole area is sort of inspired by Japanese foods and Asian foods specifically. So there's a lot of rice fields. There's a lot of people trying to make karage and stuff. So again, one of those kind of indications eventually that something special about this Nanahoshi that's with Orsted. Now, how involved is she on everything, or is it just this one guy that she talked to and told him to make this Nanahoshi style thing? If different Nanahoshi, we don't know at this point. The Shrone Kingdom and Zenoba. This was truly interesting because yes, Rudius gets captured by Pax, and eventually is met by Zenoba, one of the sons, the princes of this kingdom. And there's a few things that was significantly different. First of all, Zenoba had the box that had the Ponsu and the pendant in it. So he got that from Lilia at some point. And so that's how he sort of tries to draw the comparisons of the Ponsu that's in the box are exactly the same as the Ponsu on the figure that he has of Roxy. And so he made that connection there. But what was really crazy was how Zenoba essentially resolved everything. He called forth his brothers. Yes, the two other princes. He dragged them down there and revealed all of Pax's wrongdoings. He called out to them, your brother did this. He blackmailed the knights themselves. He captured their family members. The entire time the brothers are going, but he established these really good connections with those that are selling the slaves. They can't fight against Pax. Pax is very valuable to the family. But no, Zenoba forces them to have to go speak to their father to reveal all of the wrongdoings of Pax. How he treated Roxy and drove her out. Which, yes, Roxy was more important to this kingdom than even Pax himself. That's why she was able to treat him so terribly, is because she was important as a court magician. Pax had pushed him too far. And now he had this guy before him that Zenoba loved and thought was the greatest person ever. And so he was willing to kill his own brothers. He even told his two brothers, I can kill him and make it to you guys and kill you before the knights can stop me. And it forced them. They were terrified of Zenoba. And it forced them to have to finally act. And that's how Rudius was freed. Not that he basically forced Pax to have to say, okay, I'll undo everything. No, he forced the other princes to accept, to basically exile Pax. Which, like I mentioned before, the box. The box from Lilia. This was really curious as to why they changed this in the anime. Eventually, Rudius is talking to Lilia after all the things that happened in Sharon. He thanks her for bringing his present, the box. Specifically, he says, thank you for bringing them to me. And he's talking about the Ponsu. And she says specifically, I know how important they are to you. Lilia is talking about the Ponsu. She's not talking about the pendant. But the odd thing that happens from this whole situation is Rudius, in his own mind, believes that Lilia made the pendant. Zenoba believed that the pendant was in the box to essentially cover up the fact that it was a box holding Ponsu. So when somebody opens the box, they see this pendant sitting in this white cloth and they go, oh, it's to protect this pendant. Zenoba knew that it was the Ponsu that was the important thing in it. Lilia knew that the Ponsu was important to Rudius. But what Lilia didn't know and did not clarify was that Rudius believed the pendant was made by Lilia and it was a gift from her. Unlike the anime that really quickly clarifies, no, Sylphie made that necklace for you. A very odd difference, and it's going to be very curious as to what that sort of leads to in, I guess, from both perspectives. If you're a novel-only person, what the hell are they doing there? And from a anime-only going into the novels, you're thinking, that's kind of weird that was changed. My perspective, obviously. Obviously, one of the most impactful scenes in the first season of the adaptation of Mushoku Tensei was Turning Point 2. This was a huge and epic and pretty much story-shifting concept here that really did shake up how we view this world. And while I do believe the anime did a really good job of portraying that scene, especially the velocity of the attacks itself, the helplessness of Rudius, the helplessness of Eris, the helplessness of Rizurd himself, there is a little bit of context that was sort of lost with the adaptation, and I think one of the more telling elements in there was the emphasis on Orsted always keeping his eyes on Rudius. He knew that Rudius was an anomaly. He knew that Rudius was a pawn of the man god. But more importantly, it seems as if, and especially as emphasized in the novels, Orsted doesn't know what Rudius is capable of. He keeps his distance. He always ponders what Rudius is doing. He always looks at him with a curious look. But at the same time, again, it seems as if he never stops looking at Rudius. He doesn't know what he's going to do. And again, he doesn't know what he's capable of doing. And I think one of the more fascinating things that I kind of noticed when I was reading it as well is that it almost gives, in the anime, it almost feels like Orsted is very confident about everything he does. Oh, this. Oh, okay, this. Counter, attack, counter, attack. In the novels, it almost gives a feeling as if, one, he's observing what Rudius is doing, and he's very curious about what he's doing. But at the same time, it's almost as if Orsted is trying out things. As we find out from the man god, he knows all abilities. And so when he creates like the worm gate, It's almost like he creates it like, was this how it goes? Oh, yeah, it's a little bit smaller than I thought it would be, but it works kind of thing. It's almost curious how he acts and how he sort of just does things on a whim. But again, he constantly is questioning what is Rudeus doing next. He uses Disturb Magic to stop Rudeus, but then Rudeus raises the other hand and uses a spell. You got around my Disturb Magic. How'd you do that? Oh, you're using Incantation List with multiple elements. Very curious. Again, he's constantly observing what Rudeus is doing and trying to counter it. And I also kind of predicted that it kind of made it feel as if Rudeus lost his mind as he was losing his breath. He couldn't think anymore. Oxygen wasn't going to his brain. He wasn't thinking right. He kind of spews everything into this last big ball of flame that he just was going to destroy everything. He wanted to create something atomic levels of an explosion. And the way that he always speaks about Edis and Rajerd, he speaks about them as if he's supposed to do something with them later. He hasn't met them yet. Edis has potential, but she's not quite molded yet. I believe he created the Worm Gate because he wanted to absorb the impact, because he knew it would probably kill everybody there. And so he's essentially trying to keep everybody safe for later time. Again, there's so much content here. I made pretty much an entire video about this one segment, so definitely check that out if you want my full perspective of it. But there is a lot of context here, and it really does feel like Orsted was really curious about Rudeus, and he was very cautious of him. And yes, the biggest oof of the anime adaptation, I think most everybody agrees on, besides maybe Zenith's perspective, is Edis's perspective. A big, massive missed opportunity to really clarify who Edis is as a character. Yes, in Volume 6, we literally get a whole entire chapter of Edis explaining everything she's thought about, felt, experienced from the moment Rudeus meets her, starts to train her, until the moment she walks away from him. And what we get from that perspective, and again, this is one of those ones where I like, just go read it. Like, just read that one section. Read Zenith's chapter and read Edis' perspective chapter in Volume 6. What we essentially get from there is, from the very beginning, Edis felt like Rudeus was the only one that she would ever be able to marry. Her mother pushed her into that bedroom to bed Rudeus. And the moment they were transported, she felt like she was being punished because she pushed him away. And then from that point on, and this is the heartbreaker, Edis has always felt like she needed to get better and stop being a brat. Because while they were on the Demon Continent, Edis always believed that Rudeus was going to leave her behind. And she was terrified of that. She wasn't as strong as him. She wasn't as strong as Rajerd. So she was constantly training because she didn't want to be left behind. And the moment that she finally gets home, the immediate thought that she had was that how amazing Rudeus has been this entire time. And he fought against Orsted. And yet still, even though he died essentially, he's preparing for the next time. And when she discovered that her family was gone, she wanted to lock him down. She didn't want to lose this last thing, and that's why she bedded him. It changes so much perspective, because in the end, what happened is she felt like she did him wrong, that she was holding him back, and that she wasn't good enough for him. So she basically pushed herself at that point, I'm going to leave him get stronger, so that when I come back to him, we can stand side by side, and then we can get married. Then we can have children. But she didn't want him to follow her, so she wrote the worst letter ever, which totally freaking wrecks him. But yes, it is an amazing chapter, and it completely blew me away. Again, I highly suggest reading it. The other funny thing that comes from this segment is that we find out that there was an exchangement of underwear when Rudeus wakes up after Edis leaves him, after they bed. And that was that Rudeus realized that his underwear is gone, which implies that Edis stole his underwear. So I don't know if the anime is ever going to cover that, because they never mention it. But yes, he does steal her underwear, obviously. So now Rudeus has 2 pairs of underwear in his pockets, the Holy Relic and the Edis Relic. The final big thing in Volume 6 before Season 1 ends is Lilia's perspective and how she views Aisha. This is another one of those ones where we could possibly get into it in the anime later on, but this is technically a segment that is covered in the novel while Lilia is traveling to meet with Paul. And in the anime, we see that Lilia arrives with Paul. So that segment has been technically chronologically passed in the anime. But in this segment, Aisha is essentially teasing Lilia that she wants to be with Killmaster. And Lilia is like, wait, I thought you knew that Killmaster was Rudius. And while she's teasing her, we get a perspective of Lilia essentially realizing that this entire time she's been using Aisha to make up for her mistakes. Like, she's been molding Aisha to serve Rudius, and she realized at some point, I've been doing this because I messed up, because I betrayed Zenith, that I'm trying to make my daughter, which I got from that betrayal, serve Rudius to sort of make up for it. And she's afraid in her own mind that she doesn't care for her daughter, that she's not a good mother. But it wasn't until the displacement happened, in which, again, the anime changes. When the displacement incident happened, Lilia is transported with Aisha into the Shrone Palace, into a random room. And the soldiers flood in there because they're invaders. And Lilia, in that moment, when they get captured and they're being dragged away, her first thing in her mind that comes is, let Aisha go. You can take me, you can do whatever you want with me, but please save Aisha. She realized in that moment that she was a mother. She realized that she did care for Aisha. And in the end, she finally realized that she doesn't care who Aisha serves. Killmaster, this fake Killmaster character, or Rudius. Basically saying, random person or Rudius. Whatever Aisha chooses, I just want her to be amazing. And she's been molding her this entire time to be an amazing maid. And this is something that Aisha herself even recognizes. Mother made me the perfect maid, which is great because I look up to Rudius so much that I'm glad I have those skills now, because I can be a good servant to Rudius, who is incredible. If I didn't have these skills, I wouldn't be worthy to help him and serve him. So in return of this really screwed up life that, again, is all caused by Paul, let's be perfectly honest again, Paul is a dirtbag. All this was led and caused by Paul. But in the end, she still loves Aisha, and she still wants to do good for Aisha. She still wants Aisha to be successful. And yes, the other fun oddity about this whole situation with Paul and her is that they were originally supposed to get married. Paul deflowered her and ran away, and in the end, they're still technically husband and wife. It's just that Lily is screwed up. Finally, some odds and ends that were skipped by the anime adaptation that, again, they could get into because they're kind of about elements and magic and whatnot. Affinity schools. They never really got into full details of this, but there essentially is affinity schools in this world. You can either have an opposition or an affinity to a magic element. And what they kind of describe this is that depending on your environment that you're in, or things that you're kind of inflicted against, or things that you might become impacted by, will affect your affinity or opposition to certain elements. The one example they give is dwarves. Dwarves are typically affinity to fire and earth because they're up in the mountains when they're lava and stuff. But they usually have an opposition to water because water floods will come into these caves and drown them. Specifically with Sylphie, she's not good with fire. And he comes to find out that she apparently was burnt when she was very young, and he figures this is probably why she has an opposition to fire. Labyrinths. I ate up the explanation of labyrinths. And again, this is something they could probably get into, as based on the synopsis and what we kind of know about Zenith, we could be diving into some labyrinths and we can get an explanation there later on. But essentially, labyrinths are created by mana and magic. And they always have this core within the labyrinth itself, which is sort of the heart of the labyrinth. And they're always protected by a beast of some sort. And sometimes you'll have monsters, they'll come in and they'll eat the core, and it'll make the entire labyrinth collapse. Or sometimes it's not built correctly, so it'll just kind of cave in on itself. But the ones that remain, over time, they feed off anything that comes in there. So you have monsters that come down to try to get to the core and they die, their mana fuels it and it gets stronger and bigger and bigger. Adventurers come in to get the rewards and they die, and they feed it and they feed it. And so some of these bigger labyrinths is just being fed, it's feeding off of the mana of monsters and everything that comes into it. One key one they kind of hint at, and I think it's sort of shown in the first season, that one scene when the displacement incident's happening, you see Orsted and he's walking along this ridge, and you see these red worms. This, I'm assuming, is one of those labyrinths that is explained in the novel. It's this labyrinth that has this big mouth, and as the red worms fly by it, it eats them. And you think about how powerful a red worm is, how much mana that's giving it, and how big it's getting, and how massive it is. It really turns the labyrinth into like a living, breathing thing. The other thing they kind of note is that there's a lot of magic items in these labyrinths. Most people that are coming in there, they're not after the core. They're after the items that are dropped by other adventurers. Because an adventurer goes in there with a sword, they die, they drop the sword. Over time, mana flows through it, and it becomes enchanted. And that's why a lot of these people like these items in there. Which gets into talking about equipment. Elena Lisa specifically is wearing a shield that is magical. It's able to mitigate any attack. She also has a sword that with a thrust can create a wind vacuum that can cut down trees. So again, these are really special items that can essentially turn the tides of fights. And it's something that a lot of people are after, not just for their own sake, but for obviously money purposes. To get into some other characters' equipment that might become significant later on, we have the sword that Eris is using. In the anime, when Rudius is leaving the Midgard village, they come up and they give him a sword. And we find out later that he gives that sword to Eris, and she really likes it. She's always using that sword. They specifically note, and I don't know if this will come into effect later on as something important, they specifically note that it was a sword that was dropped off by a wandering smith. And even after all the years that have passed, it's still in perfect condition. That's why I wrote it down. That's kind of an important thing. That seems that is special somehow. He also described it as dull gray steel that glowed faintly. So we'll see. Again, a wandering smith that is still perfect condition after so many years. Might be something special. And yes, there's one last piece of equipment that I want to point out that I thought was really incredible in the novel that the anime completely skipped. During the attack of Doldia village, unlike the anime, Rudius was pretty much running around with nothing on except for the vest from Geese. So imagine this naked Rudius running around while this fire is happening and people are being attacked and he has nothing but a vest on, stark naked. At some point, when he essentially joins the flank of the Doldias, after he pours down the water, and the Doldia soldiers start to essentially do their counterattack, Rudius obviously knows these guys move really fast. So he hops onto the shoulder of one of the Doldia beastmen, and they're running around as Rudius is shooting stuff at people. And he calls himself like a Rudius attachment for the shoulders that is able to deflect attacks and launch attacks. I thought it was hilarious, just this mental image that I had of him. And finally, the last thing that I want to go over that was technically skipped, or at least not fleshed out as much in the anime adaptation, was the book from Roxy. I loved how much thought was put into this book. In the anime, Rudius sends Roxy a letter saying, I want to learn Demon Tongue. Can you teach me? And so she goes through the process of making a book and sending it back to him. And yes, he notes that how beautiful it looks. He opens it up and starts reading it. But the novel, there's so much more to this book than the anime portrayed. Yes, it teaches Demon Tongue, but it emphasized the idea that it almost seems like Roxy went into the vaults of the Chiron library and essentially took every single possible word and translated it to Demon Tongue and back. It has vocabulary, it has terms, it has phrases. Additionally, everything she knew about every demon race. The do's and don'ts of every single race. She even had terrible illustrations that she drew of each one of them. It was pretty much everything Rudius needed to know before going to the demon continent. How much of his survival of the demon continent was probably based on everything that she wrote in that book. Everything he needed to know about how you talk to people and what you don't talk to certain demon folk about. It was essentially Demon Continent 101. And it was amazing. And of course, it also had an extensive section on the Midgard race. Obviously, because she would know the most about the Midgard race, because that's where she's from. But additionally, added in there the fact that Midgard race loves sweets. And so, knowing about all the effort she put into this book, she even wrote something in there specifically saying, I hope I don't see it in a market somewhere. Please don't sell it. Everything that she put in that book, he was like, I wish I can run into her again. I got to make sure that I give her some sweets when I see her again. It was just super cute. And again, to note how much effort she put into it was amazing. That's it. That is all. I hope you guys enjoyed this run through of all the insane moments skipped by the anime adaptation. As per usual, if you like this video, make sure that like button down below. I greatly appreciate your guys' support. Leave a comment. Let me know what you thought of this whole segment. Additionally, if you're new to the channel, make sure that subscribe button so you get all my content. I do news, reviews, first impressions, top list. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. Additionally, I have a Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation novel series analysis videos that I do every single Monday. I do a premiere. Everybody comes together and we talk about the novel series. Additionally, if you like this content and you want to support the channel more, we have a Patreon link, tips link, super thanks, and a membership button down below. I greatly appreciate it, but it does. And y'all take care.